everybody. Welcome. I'm Howie Howard from Mr. Furious Records. And today on Dat Fury Radio, something a little different. Author, musician, friend of mine, Sylvie Althoff is here to talk about a work of her fiction. What's up, Sylvie?
How's it going, Howie? Good to see your face there.
It's good to see you too. It's been a couple weeks since our last Hangouts, and I'm looking forward to the next one. This is our first virtual Hangouts.
Yeah, we did a lot of keeping each other company during the lockdown years, meeting in various backyards or front stoops.
I love a yard or a stoop.
Mm-hmm.
But we're here specifically to talk about your short story, The New Sound, in Saros Speculative Fiction, May 2025, issue 3. Link in the description. And this is very good. You have hard copy right there. That's beautiful.
It occupies bookshelf space, like all the best things in life.
That is delightful. But this is a music-related short story. Free to read for anybody who would like to read it. And, of course, links to your website with some of your other writing and teaching things in the notes. But, it's occurring to me, I haven't really had a chance to talk to an author in this way. So what is the... do you remember the seed or the inspiration for this particular story?
Yeah. The idea for this story, should we sort of do a little pitch of this, elevator pitch of the story, logline?
Totally. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So the story is called The New Sound. It's a sort of near future sci-fi story about a character named Kath, who is a touring musician who has an aural implant, I guess, that enhances her ability to hear and to decipher different tones and microtones. She was an early adopter of that technology of a brand called the Aura, and that allowed her to hear things at a much higher level of refinement than the natural unaided human ear. She used that to begin to create a new kind of music that she was hoping would become a huge thing once other people got aural implants, and could hear her kind of music and could, tell the different microtones and such. It ended up not quite working that way, where nobody really seemed to want to buy the kind of music that she was making. But the story follows her and her band on tour, on just a shitty tour at a terrible dive bar in Pittsburgh when her aura stops working. And it's a very short story. It's only about I'm going to get the word count. It's only about 1,500 words. So we see her struggle with her aural implant to try to get it to work, and finds on stage, gets an email from the company saying support for her Gen 1 aura has been discontinued, and we sort of end on the show falling apart and presumably her life not doing too well afterwards as well. The seed for the story, I was originally conceptualizing of this as an ocular implant, like a visual implant that could allow you to see different wavelengths of color than the unaided eye could, thinking that would, what would that mean for the art selling and art buying world if some people could see visual artwork that others just couldn't. And as I sort of chewed that over for a couple months, I realized I really don't know anything at all about visual art or color or any of those things. And I do know at least a little bit about being a performing musician, playing at a gig and having that feeling of walking into the gig with your stuff and looking at your bandmate like, what are we doing here? What is this place? Is this right? And I was able to contribute a lot of those memories, those really concrete experiences to the story, I think.
Definitely, and that shines through. It's clear that you have that you're drawing from, and I know you as a musician as well. We'll talk about that next week, but that experience you have as a musician shines through in the story, I feel.
Thanks. Yeah. Some of the inspiration for that, for the scene that I set in The New Sound, was, and it occurs to me now, I'm not going to share this person's name or the band they eventually ended up in, but when my wife and I were abroad, we were traveling in the UK. We happened to be in London, and my wife Jen got contacted by an old college friend of ours, and especially of hers, a fellow musician who, after college, had moved to the Pacific Northwest and started a band and was recording a bunch of stuff and doing tours nationally, and I guess we found out internationally. And Jen had a lot of feelings because she was not living that sort of professional gigging musician lifestyle, but she had kind of wanted to and sort of trained to. And so she had a lot of feelings about like, ah, man, my friend is doing this whole thing that I wanted to, living this life I want to, and seems really successful. We go to meet this friend of ours at this bar she's playing somewhere in the outskirts of London, and it is just such a nightmare gig. It is so, drummer falling over drunk. They can't find the owner of the bar. They don't know when they're getting paid. They don't know where they're staying tonight. And it was such an interesting contrast of, oh, wow, neither of us wants that lifestyle at all. That seems really, really miserable. Even for someone who is making a living, making their art, like performing their music that they wrote for people who want to hear it. Like that seems like a huge level of success, or seemed like, and yet it also just seems so gross and awful at the time. The story has a happy ending in that friend went on to join like a massive band that we were all really into in college, and she's playing with them to this day. But anyway, if only because it's not a very flattering story, I won't say the name of the friend or the band.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I remember. So the longest I've ever been out on air quotes tour is two nights. I mean, but that not knowing, and this was like college years, but yeah, not knowing where you're gonna stay, not really wanting to spend money on a hotel. Like 2 nights was enough to tell me that I was not cut out for that.
I mean, that's good. You were able to get that, to learn that lesson without, spending your whole life savings or months of your life. I understand touring and the road can be really hard.
Tell me, if you want, a little bit about the writing process. Are you kind of an outliner or more of a sentence level Tom Robbins construction? Because there is a lot of wonderful sentences and wonderful language and very evocative phrasing in the story.
Oh, thank you. Oh boy, I'm thinking of Tom Robbins now. That's yeah, I do tend to start with an outline, usually just a couple sentences. I've got a notes app document on my phone that I just, whatever thoughts come out of my head, I try to write it down before I forget, and then I'll copy that into a Word doc and sometimes flesh it out a little bit more with a beat by beat story outline or with characters. I didn't have much in particular in mind for this story, for the new sound. I didn't have a particular market in mind I wanted to submit it to, or anthology or anything. But I was trying to write shorter stuff, and so I didn't do that thorough of an outline for this because it is such a short story overall. So I put together just like a list of the characters and a couple sentences about where the story goes, and then I just kind of got into it. I wrote this one pretty quickly. I started it like the end of December 2024 and had it finished up by mid-January. And this is not really, I don't think you can call the submission and publication process part of the writing process, but this one sold faster than I think almost anything else I've written. I got it was rejected from 3 places, and then it was picked up by Saros, which is a new imprint of Fusion Fragment. So pretty happy about that. This felt like a real traditional sci-fi kind of thing for me. Like, this is about a tech thing and it's bad, and that's kind of the whole story. I often get lost in more, I don't know, more aspirational world building stuff or like emotional beats. I feel like I really tried to keep this one simple and clean, and I guess that was the move, Yeah, it's a very clean execution of the setup, but you get a really strong sense of the character too. It's not, it's the opposite, in fact, of kind of like the drier, like Asimov or something, I mean, it's very lived in and
fleshy, I guess, both in vibe and kind of literally with the implant and the way that the tech interface sort of works. I guess I'm coming around to say, like, I highly encourage everybody to read it, whether you identify as a sci-fi fan or not. This is an extremely like approachable story. It's free to read at the link, and 10 or 15 minutes maybe, depending on your reading speed. But really, really wonderful. It would honestly be someone's. It would be a great first science fiction story for somebody. If you're, this is mainly a music podcast. If you're a musician and maybe don't think of yourself so much as a reader or a science fiction reader, this is a really wonderful way into what some people might think is an intimidating genre.
Well, thanks. I'd certainly like to think so. I think the story has something for sci-fi fans, music fans, musicians, queer and trans people. I think a lot of people can see themselves in the story. Fans of dive bars, of whom I count myself in that for sure. Yeah, well, I'd certainly like to think this is a good way in for pretty much anybody.
I think most of the audience has probably played a gig, kind of like the one described in the story, and has a point of reference there.
I will say this is I tend to have a pretty dim view of technology, and also I'm not a super, I don't usually paint very rosy pictures of the future, which, I have a hard time really. I sometimes try to push myself into that more optimistic utopian sci-fi kind of place just to give myself somewhere nice to live in my mind. But, I feel like this is a lot of very basic short-term projection of bad trends that are currently going on, and I don't imagine will get better anytime soon. I guess this sounds like I'm undercutting the story. I think I do think it's a fun read.
Yeah, let me put a little curve on it. I mean, so the tech aspect is a little darker, maybe, but the positive aspect maybe is the grit of the character, the musician, and their determination to kind of get through the gig and push on.
Yeah,
the show must go on.
I mean, there's a seed of hope in here too, right? Technology, I do think, like something that could enhance the human ear's ability to hear different things, could present amazing artistic opportunities, right? Like music is comparable to other art forms in that technology has driven what can be accomplished with it, right? And how it, not just how it can be, what can be made, but how it's made and distributed and such. I mean, that's something, and maybe this is one for the next episode, but that's definitely something that I feel like a lot more about than I do, is how technology affects music making. I say that because I respect you, and also because I don't know much of anything about. I play acoustic instruments and struggle with like quarter-inch cables. So,
well, yeah, then maybe there's some yin and yang there that we can help each other.
Sure.
The idea of the implants in a fun way actually ties back to last week's episode, and I was talking with my friend Ebony about. We were talking about the evolution of rock, the evolution of hip-hop, the parallelism between those, if you kind of line the years up. And he had a great point about, maybe the internet has kind of... You know how there's like movements in those genres? And like big things like Nirvana or West Coast hip-hop, right? And basically in the streaming era, nothing like that has happened in any genre. I mean, there is evolution, there's amazing things happening in different subgenres, but nothing cuts across that like everybody has to deal with or contend with in terms of artistic development. And maybe the idea of the implant provides a hypothetical thing that could spur that next level of evolution. Maybe the implant is like the next Nirvana, or the next Dr. Dre.
Or I Killed My Career. Sure, yeah. I mean, I'd certainly like to think that. That is one of those things, is that technology, when it's not in this awful death spiral capitalism, can represent a major source of inspiration for people and for movements. Yeah.
Do you think you'll write? Do you have any intention to write more music-related fiction, or is that just kind of happenstance and you'll see where the muse takes you?
I was thinking about that in advance of this podcast, and I feel like music comes up somewhat frequently in the stuff that I write, in the stories that I write. Not much that has been published yet is all that musical. I had a story come out in August of this year in the publication Many Worlds. The title is Last of the Cigarette Gremlins, and it's more dive bar than music focused, but it's for sure living in the same kind of world as in the new sound.
Yeah.
I've been shopping around this. I'm fairly new to getting my writing published or trying to get my writing published. But I have the idea that every writer has like one story that they think is brilliant and nobody else wants for whatever reason. And I think I have that one about a trad jazz jam session on a planet distant from Earth. These ground down human like day labor or awful like laborers getting together to make music, and there's also giant alien bugs, and it's a lot of stuff about New Orleans trad jazz. There's some lyrical content in there. There's some stuff about the experiences of playing with other people, and I love it. And I don't know why people don't want to buy it, but I'm going to keep shopping it around. I think probably forever. And this year, I guess music's on my mind a lot. This year, I've got another story called Radio Free Luna signing off about a pirate radio station on the moon. I've only been shopping that around for a little bit, so hopefully your listeners will get a chance to read that one pretty soon. My friend Meg Elison said that this story really feels like just an excuse to flex on my amazing musical taste, which, I mean, was not an attempt, but it's a lot of name dropping of fun artists from like the 80s and 90s. So
nice. Well, that's nice to hear that there's more in the pipeline, and I'm not surprised that music is continuing to pop up, whether as kind of a main focus or just as part of the world building in your fiction. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, thanks. I mean, it's one of those things where so often, we're both into Star Trek pretty heavily, and I think that's a great example of depictions of music, and especially popular music in the future, tend to be just so hilarious and on their face ridiculous. And I feel like a lot of sci-fi authors kind of don't even try, whether it's because they don't have much personal expertise in music or familiarity with it, or just because you can't really predict this stuff without it. You can take a big swing and come up with something ridiculous, or imagine like, yeah, it's pretty much just going to be like the music that I know right now, right?
I think my thoughts were going exactly there, in that, if a movie maker, filmmaker, or author could imagine the real music of the future, you would make it and probably make $1 million making
right.
it, so you do have to, assuming that you can't do that, you have to kind of reference or remix stuff that we do know now, and kind of imagine how it would look recontextualized in whatever world you're building. It is funny, and at least half on purpose funny, how in things like Star Trek is replete with this, but characters are obsessed with pop culture from our era or technology. Tom Paris is into hot rods or whatever.
Yes.
And it's so weird that all these characters from hundreds of years in the future have interest related to 1950s to 1990s American culture.
Yeah, how about that? I mean, well, you have the classic, like, naming three things. Like, you could be the next Beethoven or the Beatles or Tapara Vulcan, right? So to give it a little bit of, like, see, we're drawing a connection between the stuff the viewer knows and made-up space stuff.
Yeah, and you just kind of have to, I think. There's not an elegant way around that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like, especially when it comes to music, I think I'm using the right term here, is sort of there's a sort of teleological view of history when it comes to musical progression, where like these songs music has to progress in this order. You think about stuff like, did you see that movie yesterday about the Beatles
I
music?
haven't, no.
I didn't either. And so now this is just two people talking about a movie they haven't seen. So maybe I should drop it here. But there is this sort of idea that especially certain kinds of pop music or you know, top tier music of the 20th century, those songs are so good that they could come out at any time in history and they would change the world, as if it didn't really matter, as if the Beatles weren't speaking to musicians, you know, before them, right? I don't know. It's hard to predict stuff. That's my view as a sci-fi writer, is it's hard to predict stuff, and often you look quite silly doing it. And I think that's true most of all when it comes to music.
Definitely. And that is a fascinating discussion on soundtrack. This is almost a whole nother topic, but you know, to what extent does objective reality, like the harmonic series and things, or the physical environment of early humans and the sounds that are available in a basically kind of it's not a non-technological environment, but like an Iron Age environment, right? There's a lot of sounds you just can't make physically. And so to what extent does physical phenomenon, physical limitations influence the development of music and create pathways that you just kind of have to follow? Because you don't have FM synthesis available to you in the year 1500 or whatever. And that, wow, I'm way out on the ledge. I think there's something to that, to bring it back to a sci-fi context. I would not be surprised. Let's imagine intelligent aliens, right?
Okay, done.
I would not be surprised to find out that their music is in relationship to the harmonic series in some way. Not the same way that ours is.
Right.
But I bet there's maybe some concept of octaves.
I mean, maybe. Why not, instead of, well, I'm speaking of going out on the ledge. Have you
Let's go.
Have you read Musicophilia by Oliver Sacks?
I haven't.
This is the neurologist and author who wrote The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. He wrote a whole book about music and how it affects the brain, and it's really cool. And it opens with a little scene in which aliens come visit the Earth, and a concert is performed for them of a piece written in their honor, and the aliens like applaud the composer for their amazing work, and then get back in their spaceship and they're like, did you know what the fuck that just was? That made no sense to me. They were just making a bunch of weird noises, huh? And that was the last appearance of aliens in that book, so I got less interested after that. But the idea, at least by someone who knows much more about the brain than I ever will, is that the way music interacts with the human brain is so unique and so deep-rooted in our mental pathways that probably, I mean, even organisms on Earth with whom we share the same like surroundings and a lot of the same DNA do not interact with music the way we do. I don't know though. I would love to think a little more on alien music.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that they would have the same emotional reaction or anything like that, but just that there might be a name for frequency doubling.
Right.
Because that's physics. And would they use it in the same way? Who knows? Probably not. I'm not saying that, but just there are some aspects to sound, some physical aspects that might provide a common ground.
Sure. I don't know. Would those aliens need to have a tympanic membrane? Would they need to have... I mean, they would receive those sounds differently than we would.
I learned, I'm going to link to this video. Maybe this is a good ending place. But speaking of tympanic membrane, I learned just the other day from, I believe, a Dan Worrell video that different types of microphones, one type of microphone, if I can't bring this up, I might have to edit this out or just link to it because my memory is failing me right now. But it's like one type of microphone senses sound pressure, and one type of microphone senses sound level, and those are different things that are 90 degrees out of phase in physical terms.
Ooh.
So tympanic membrane, I believe, responds to pressure. Maybe an alien could have a sense organ that responds directly to sound level.
I mean, hey, aliens, if you're out there, Dat Fury Radio, hit up the show, get in touch. I want to hear from you.
Sylvie, you brought it home. Perfect podcast ending.
Got it.
You can read Sylvie's story, The New Sound, in Saros Speculative Fiction, issue 3, at the link in the description. You can catch up with Sylvie at sylviealthoff.com. Links to other stories, links to socials, and all that kind of good stuff. Sylvie will be back next week for a different discussion. But listeners, have a great week, and we will talk to you next time on Dat Fury Radio.